Hey everybody, welcome to Author Talk. I'm Sarah Donovan, and we are meeting the generous authors who contributed pieces to the young adult anthology Just YA, which is published as an open education resource through Oklahoma State University. The link is in the description below, and you can also get a beautiful paperback anywhere books are sold. So this is for you too. So today we are so grateful to have Kayla with us. Welcome, Kayla.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Will you say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Kayla Whaley. I am from Atlanta, Georgia, a little bit outside of Atlanta in the suburbs. I mostly write children's books and YA, but I also write adult nonfiction as well. I have an MFA in creative nonfiction from the University of Tampa. And yeah, right now I'm focused on a chapter book series for early readers. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Oh, a wide range of
Wide
writing.
range.
How did you become a writer?
Not the typical way. I feel like a lot of writers have been wanting to write their whole lives, and that was not me. I didn't start writing at all until college when my best friend, who was a writing major, was like, "Hey, take an elective. That's a creative writing class. You'll like it." I was like, "All right," and I did. And so after that, I got more into it, and just for fun, like I would write while she was writing, and we would sort of like talk about like projects we were working on, none of which for me ever went anywhere because I wasn't there yet. And then I did grad school for a completely different thing. I did it for nonprofit management. And as I was getting ready to graduate and deciding if I wanted to go for a PhD, I said, I'm going to write for children. I think I'm going to be a YA writer. I think that's what I'm going to do instead. And that's how that happened.
Wow.
It's very random.
I no, I think this is like one of the reasons I love these conversations is because there's a perception of
Mhm.
a writer's trajectory or a lifespan of a writer or how they get into it. And I think when we ask that question, we can find out that sometimes it's circuitous and sometimes it's um, just a beautiful aha moment that someone comes to. And sometimes it's just the words of someone encouraging you or inviting you to
Yeah,
take a class, and it could change the trajectory of your life, which is pretty cool.
literally. Yeah, it literally did. And I mean, it took a few years for it to simmer into something more substantial. But once it hit, I was like, oh, well, that's it. That's what I'm gonna do. So
Did you have YA authors or like a sense of what the YA stories do that made you compelled to choose YA?
yeah, so at the time, that was most of what I read was young adult. I mean, I still read a bunch of young adult, but well, I don't read as much anymore because I don't have as much time. But like when I do, I still love YA. But that was most of what I was reading at the time. And it was really during the like a YA boom in the early 2010s. And like it had just grown exponentially as a category. So that just felt really natural at the time because that's what I was reading most of. And so that was what I was working on was it felt right. Plus I was still in my early 20s. So like I was a young adult, really. Like, I mean, I wasn't a teenager, but quite literally a young adult. Um, and I just loved what was happening in the category. Like I loved the risk taking that I was seeing authors do, and the variety of genre was really exciting for me. Like you didn't have to just write literary; you could write fantasy or mystery or rom-coms or whatever. That was really invigorating, and so yeah, it just felt like a natural place to start. It's not where I landed ultimately. Like I still write YA, mostly short stories, but then I experimented more on my own and I realized I love writing nonfiction, um, and like adult nonfiction in particular, but also YA nonfiction, um, and just moved on from there. So like I still do all of it, but yeah, that was where I started was in YA.
Yeah, love it. Thanks for sharing a little bit of the background there.
Yeah.
Great.
Sorry, I'm talking so much. I didn't mean to, but
That's the point.
okay.
We want to hear from you, and when I can ask a question that can get someone talking a little bit more, I feel like this I'm doing my job here too. Is to hear a little bit more of the story behind things, and yeah,
Okay.
it's so thanks for sharing that. I like it. Well, we're here to talk a little bit about the Just YA book, and how did you hear about this opportunity to contribute?
I'm pretty sure you were the one that emailed me and said, "Hey, we're doing this. Would you like to be a part of it?" And I was like, "Me? You want me to be a part of this?" And I was immediately like, "Obviously, yes. This is one of the coolest things I've ever heard. Like, this idea is so needed and so um, generous and exciting." And I was just so thrilled to be invited to be a part of it, and then to be able to contribute what I did to this ridiculously excellent collection of pieces. So, yeah, I was really grateful.
Yeah, thank you. I, you're being very gracious, but I think, this project was dependent on everybody's generosity, of sharing a story without being paid or without, any sort of like, direct compensation for
Yeah.
it. There's labor that goes into it. It's difficult to ask people to do something for free. Um, but it is for like understanding that it's for teachers to have that access and students as well at a time where a lot of things are being censored or closed or
Yep.
accessibility is a key thing. Like books aren't free.
Yeah.
Um, Access to stories that are for youth, are not always in those textbooks that the
Yeah.
schools buy,
And for all youth, not
Yeah.
just a subset of youth as
Yes, and
well.
that was the key for this is like making sure that we can have a variety of themes like love, land, world, futures, and being, and then a variety of authors as well, who can speak to just different ways of living and being in the world. And so for students who have maybe an exaggerated sense of, their stories being told in a lot of places, and other students who don't have that, it's important for all students to see different versions of living and moving among the world, I think.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so it took me going to specific people and asking, which is not also something that happens very often, where
True.
we are asked, and when it feels really good for someone to come and say, I really appreciate you and I'd like you to do this.
Yeah.
And for someone who is a kind of a words of affirmation type person, boy, does it feel good to be valued,
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And to just be like seen and recognized as like, oh, this is what you do, and you might like to do this with us. And that's just really, it's really lovely. It was really, really lovely. Because you're right, direct solicitations like that just don't happen very often. So yeah, it was that piece of it was just selfishly really nice for me. But
Good. Thank you. And thanks for responding to me because
of
that felt good
course,
for me too. Yeah. So lots of good feelings going on. Well,
all the good feelings.
so would you like to talk a little bit about your contribution first, or do you want to read it first? Which one?
I might talk about it a little bit first, just because
Okay.
it's a little bit unusual of a piece. So I actually wrote this, like I said, I have an MFA in creative nonfiction. So I wrote this during my MFA. So it was probably in 2018. I wrote the first version of this essay because my thesis was an essay collection. Um, and we had every month we had to turn in like 20 pages of new work or whatever. And so I think I wrote this one as like my deadline was coming up. I was like, I have to write something. And I was very into experimental essays at the time, like the essays that took advantage of unusual or atypical formats in particular, like braided essays, hermit crab essays, that kind of thing. And I remember I wish I could remember what piece it was. I don't remember, but we had read a piece in one of my classes months before. And there had been a line, just like a phrase in there about like a self portrait made up of scars or something. And I don't remember who it was by. I wish I had written it down, but I didn't think it was going to be a thing. But like months later, that phrase stuck in my head still. And I was like, what about a family portrait version? And so that was where this sort of was born from. And I purposely wrote it in like a numbered style format because I was thinking of like when you go to museum and there's like the little catalogs of the information about the piece, and like sometimes they'll have like asterisks or like multiple like bullet points or whatever or numbered pieces, talking about like when and where and who by and like the context and stuff. So I kind of wanted to mimic or emulate that somewhat, so that it felt like you were reading descriptions on ultimately one big portrait, but like split up. If that does that make sense? I hope that's
Yeah.
what it accomplished. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll find out. But that was sort of the impetus for it.
Okay.
And so what's interesting is this wasn't originally written to be YA specifically. Um, but as soon as you sent me the like the request to submit, I was like, oh wait, no, this would fit really well for YA, like because it is so much about like going from chronologically like youth to young adulthood. And I feel like parents like are such a huge part of being a young adult, and we don't always see that for reasons that are make sense craft wise and also thematically. But I liked that parents were a central part here. And so I felt like it fit the vibe. So I decided to rework this piece a little bit and then submit it for this. So yeah, that's how this came about.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to show, just you can see that
Yes.
it's lit.
The formatting. Mhm.
Yeah, the way that it looks on the page is interesting. It will read that way too.
Yeah.
But again, this I'll link it in the description below.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool. All right. Shall we?
Yeah.
It's been a while since I've done a reading, so like I'm rusty. I'm not gonna lie to you. Hopefully it comes across okay. All right. Family portrait in scars. 1. 2 inches long, the center of my upper right thigh. Muscle biopsy, age 2. The anesthesia didn't work. They carved the chunk out with only Novocaine numbing the skin. I remember screaming. Slightly above and to the right is a freckle, like an eye to the scar's mouth, like a winking face in my leg. 2. A low arc low on my mother's belly. C-section. May 19th, 1991. Age 26. 3 months before my younger sister was due. Mom thought she was constipated right up until her water broke. 3. The length of my spine curved this way and that. Spinal fusion, 4th grade. Only 6 days in the hospital. Therapy dogs were coming on the 7th, but the doctors wouldn't let me stay. 4. A starburst of a bruise. My sister's right foot. I misjudged the distance between us in the mirror, closer than they appear. I didn't realize that bump was her foot. My chair, mid-wheel drive, turned on a dime. She didn't scream, but her mouth stretched in the mirror like a surrealist painting, her body lifting upward as if to loose herself. I froze until she whisper shouted, "Move!" The bruise lasted months, faded eventually to slight discoloration. Probably a fractured metatarsal, but she never got it checked. On that foot now, a tattoo of the bird-headed man from Bird-Headed Man with Bison at Let's Go. 5. Do tattoos count as scars? Do piercings? Does the barely there line I'm so fond of on the inside of my thumb count if I can't remember its source? 6. Psoriasis across the full terrain of my dad's knuckles. No cure. Insurance stopped covering the cream he used to keep the scales in check. These days, he eats cans of tuna for the omega-3 fatty acids, slurping the leftover water straight from the sharp rim. His knuckles are a gentle pink, like the flaky gleam of certain scallop shells. 7. A small, circular burn right side of my neck. Mole removal, mid-teens, elective. The dermatologist suggested seeing a plastic surgeon to ensure less of a mark. 8. 2 precise trails of small, circular burns along the inside of my sister's left forearm. Cigarette burns, age 20, self-inflicted. Faded now. Under the emergency room lights, though, fresh and molten. An anchor to hold me inside those white walls instead of letting myself float away. 9. A short-lived scar, which is to say, a contradiction. A diamond-shaped patch of skin scraped off my chest, age 25, self-inflicted. The skin heated as I scratched. Satisfying friction. Satisfying, too, the burst of red in the mirror and the watery film that built up soon after, and sooner still congealed to pus. After the infection cleared, a raised scar I'd hoped would fade into a blush-tinted memento, but faded instead back to skin. 10. A purple splotch on the back of my sister's right hand. Ironing accident, age 23. Running late for work. The restaurant's guests asked about it for months until the mark matured and turned rich as the wine she served them. 11. An ever-changing array of cuts, scrapes, and pale patches of healed-over skin on Dad's forearms, from cat's claws or dog's claws, metal edges or metal tools or branches, sometimes from seemingly nothing at all. The older he gets, the thinner his skin becomes. 12. A lattice of carefully shallow cuts the length of my sister's thighs. The usual instruments, pre-teens to mid-20s. We were having dinner at Texas Roadhouse when she, 11, showed us the first one. Pails of whole peanuts sat on every table and shucked shells carpeted the floor. The burgers were thick, peppery, slathered with mayonnaise. The pre-dinner rolls, warm, glazed golden, were served with packs of cinnamon butter, a surprising sweetness. We never ate there again. 13. Third-degree burns on mom's face, left arm, and side. Car crash, age 15. Her friend, drunk, hit a telephone pole. Mom wasn't wearing a seatbelt. She fell out the passenger side door and the car rolled on top of her. She was trapped for 10, 15 minutes, long enough for her skin and the muscle beneath to burn away where it touched the undercarriage, for gravel to embed in the wounds. 14. To clean her wounds, doctors applied gauze with ointment and, after cementing, ripped both gauze and damaged tissue away. A recurring process. She quickly learned the sound of her doctor's shoes. Whenever she heard the distinctive click-clack on tile, she started screaming. 15. The unknown to me ones. 16. The ones unknown to each of our own selves. 17. A sunken area on the inside of mom's left bicep, presumably from the crash, like the others. No, she told me, age 27. My nose came from my arm. For months, her arm was attached to her face so the doctors could graft the skin and shape it, like damp clay, into a nose. 18. A notch scooped out of the shell of my right ear. Growth removal, caused by recurring pressure. Dad scoops a hole from my pillow. Nightly, Mom sweeps my hair away from the sensitive curve. I still sleep with my ear in the hollow, cradled in the protective lack.
Kayla. Wow. What stands out to you as you read this again?
It's actually the first time I've read it out loud before, like
Yeah.
for somebody. I'm sorry, I needed a sip of
Yes,
something.
hydrate. Yes,
Yeah.
hydrate.
Um, yeah, so I was thinking about it earlier today when I was like practicing. I was like, yeah, I didn't think about how this is gonna read aloud when I was writing it because it's so intentionally choppy in places. Like the way it's written is so like staccato almost, like the descriptions, especially at the beginning of each point. So I hope it read okay. It felt okay to read it, but I just didn't. I usually am very conscious of how a piece will sound aloud when I'm writing it. And this one I wasn't because I was so focused on the way it looked and like making sure that formatting was, does that make sense? Was like worked for the piece
Yeah.
and everything.
Yes.
That was really interesting. That was a really cool exercise to read it out loud and see how it flows. But I feel like it went okay.
Yeah, I think like, these are the things that I think about as a teacher, as a classroom teacher of English language arts, and we're always looking for ways um, to have students think about the text as it's crafted by another
Mm,
person. Like these are all intentional decisions that an author made. And a lot of times when we hand a textbook to our students or we're reading something, it's really for decoding it or comprehending it and not thinking
yeah,
always as art. Like we're in the business of English language arts as teachers,
yeah,
and
so
thinking
true.
about the art and the decisions. And there's one for the way it looks on a page.
Yeah,
There's others for the way that it sounds. And we
yeah.
have lots of teachers who just read the book aloud, a
Mhm.
whole book, 6 weeks, 300 pages. The students never see what it looks like on the page, or like listening is different than seeing. Seeing and
Yeah,
listening is something like all of those are different aesthetic experiences, right?
right. And they have to work together ultimately, I feel like. But it also occurred to me as I was reading it just now that, so like I said, originally this was written as a part of a collection, um, or at least with the intention of being part of a collection. So it just occurred to me, I should have thought of this before, but readers of this piece in this book in Just YA won't have the benefit of the context that if you had seen my full collection, you would have, particularly about my disability. Like I didn't even say wheelchair in there. Like at one point I said my chair,
Mhm.
but and that's like because that's how I talk about it. So like that's more natural for me anyways. But when I was originally drafting it, I had talked a lot about my disability in earlier pieces of the collection, So the reader of this piece wouldn't need that background. And I feel like it does work really well as is. But that is an interesting thing I thought of like how that works when you take a piece that's intended for a specific context and then shift it into a new context. Like, what do you need to like change or accommodate for? Like, what are you losing? What are you gaining?
Mhm.
Especially in terms of like that wider context. But I feel like it did work. I mean, hopefully you agree, but
Yeah.
I feel like it works well
Well, see, this
on
is
its own.
where I think like, our view also in creating this is like we want to show that we value and trust our youth readers. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
but they'll figure it out. Like
Yeah.
we talk about one of the key like reading skills that is in like every department meeting from like every grade level is talking about inferring or
Yeah.
inferencing skills. And if you got to give students some time in a poem or a short piece to puzzle it out,
Yeah.
and that the authors is doing their job and they're trusting the reader to puzzle it out, to piece it together, to draw on what they know,
Yeah.
to fill in some of the
Yeah.
spaces in the margins or the gaps in between the one and the two, and start piecing it together. We don't need the author to lay it all out really didactically.
Yeah.
That's part of the art of it and the trusting of the reader to like get through the end and say, okay, in
Exactly.
each of these, 18 pieces, they could all be their own chapter in a book.
Right. Yeah.
They could all be their own story. They could all be their
Hmm.
own book, and these are
Yeah.
little pieces together in this format is like a family portrait in like a little
Hmm.
collage of numbers with just enough scenes that we can figure it out, and yet as a whole it says something
Yeah.
and is probably, and then in the context of your collection it's going to say something else, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And I think that too, so like what you were saying about trusting the reader to be able to infer and like make these connections on their own, that's something I think about all the time when I'm writing about disability, which is what I'm always writing about ultimately. Um, because when you're writing about something that isn't in the margins, that is like centered all the time, readers already have the context they need and they already have the language about the topic or about the subject. Um, so you don't have to explain. But I find that a lot of times I'm having to overcompensate for a lack of exposure to disability, sort of like my particular kind of disability, like to wheelchair users, to all of that, because it's just not present in media the way that other things are. And I mean, that's true, obviously, for all marginalized groups and identities. I'm just coming at it specifically from disability. But so, yeah, like it's always a balancing act of how much context do I need to provide because society has neglected to provide it for people? And how much can I trust people to infer? And I will say that having been writing for now, seriously, like 10 years or more, I do feel like it's changing. Like, I don't feel like I'm having to like that balance is shifting. I'm able to leave more of it off the page now. I feel more comfortable leaving more of it off the page now than I was 10 years ago. So that's a good sign. It's still a long way to go, but just from my experience, it feels like we're getting somewhere. So that's good. But yeah, just to speak on that a little more as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad that you're like pulling on that thread a little bit to think about the work of the author, especially when you are writing for or with or in
Hmm.
advocacy of historically marginalized people. And I think also the role of the reader taking on a little bit more of that labor,
Yeah. Exactly.
um, to do a little bit extra reading, to read a little bit about your bio, to read some of
Yeah.
the other stories, and to read other uh, pieces and poems, and to seek out stories so that there is a collage and a body of literature that's going to inform our understanding as we read multiple representations of
Yeah.
different ways of being in the world. It's on us to seek that out as readers,
Yeah.
well. And of course, the authors are helping us, and the authors have a reason for writing and a story they want to tell. And we
Sorry.
love that, but I think, putting a little bit of that work on the reader is Good.
I agree. And like what I mean when like things are shifting is I should have clarified. I mean like I'm not getting as much pushback from editors and stuff, if that makes sense. Like a lot of time years past, I would submit something, an essay or a short story or something, and the editor would come back and tell me I need to explain this further because readers aren't going to know what this term means, or they're not going to understand that you're talking about this topic or something because they don't. So I was having to, like, I was being actively asked to explain more. And so I felt the need to do that. And I don't feel that need anymore because I'm not getting as much pressure. I mean, maybe I'm just working with better people, who knows? But like, it does feel like there is a little bit of a shift, at least, of more awareness of, yeah, some of that's going to have to be on the readers. And like, that's okay. Like, I also had to come to a place as a writer where I felt comfortable with readers not understanding everything that I'm saying, if that makes sense. Like that had to be okay with me. Obviously, as a writer, you want your message to get across, you want what you're saying to come through. But I had to accept some people just aren't going to understand it, and that's fine. Like they can understand, they can try if they want to, and maybe they'll get it. And if they don't, that's not on me. Like sometimes it's on me if I'm writing badly, but like a lot of times it's not. So yeah, anyways, I'm just rambling now, but
No, I'm so glad that you mentioned that you brought up the publisher piece, and this is
yeah,
another thing that we don't. I think the English language arts classrooms can do a much better job of talking about how these books or these texts or these land into our classroom, that
yeah,
there is a system that allows it to arrive there. You know, there
yep,
are publishers who are selecting the texts that go in the textbook that is sold to these school districts for millions of dollars that ends up in your classroom, and this is what you read, right?
yeah,
There are publishers who are gatekeepers. You know, you've got
yep,
to have an agent first, and the agent then has to get it to the publisher, and then the publisher, you get an editor there. And these people are saying like, well, if we're going to sell it, it needs to be like this. And if you want it
yeah,
to sell, we need to do these kinds of things. And the company that you're dealing with, whether they're, you know, a ethically minded, socially just sort of company or they're profit oriented, you know, all of those pieces are important. And you
yeah,
bringing that up there was like, yes, of course. Like I'm thinking about from a teacher's perspective, but from a publishing perspective, if you want your story out there, and you have someone who's willing to publish it for you, to a
yeah.
degree, there might
Sometimes
be
you
some
have to,
compromise.
yeah, sometimes you have to make a compromise. So yeah, like it, and that's something I don't think I ever heard addressed in my English classes growing up, like ever, that yes, like we were talking about earlier, everything you see on the page is the result of a series of decisions the author made, but those decisions aren't always craft based. Like sometimes they're forced externally, like because you have to compromise or because maybe you agree that like this note was a good note and you wanted to take it, but like it doesn't happen in a vacuum, you know? So like that is, I guess, important to keep in mind that it is art and it's business. Like, and there's more to it. Like it's not, I mean, I guess there are exceptions if it's like truly self-published or um, part of a like an art exhibit or something like that, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, in general, yeah, nothing exists in a vacuum.
Right, right. And I think that's the other part about this anthology, and we're going to kind of transition to hearing what's next for you.
Yes. Yes.
But the board that the advisory board for this anthology were classroom middle school teachers, high school teachers, young adult literature scholars, and actual high school students, right? So
Yes.
we have this collection of submissions, and we all read them. Even English language teachers, so like
Mm,
bilingual teachers as well, all from different cultures. And
yeah.
you know, we're all reading it with all these different perspectives to say like, is it checking these boxes? Is it trusting youth? Is it offering some representation? Is it offering like representation of intersectional identities? Like, are we
Hmm.
seeing that? Is it affirming? Is there joy, right?
Yeah.
All these different eyes on the collection, to make sure that we are the ones working together to make it. And having it open access means that it didn't also have to go through a business
Yes.
where there was money being exchanged or some
Which
contracts.
is just, it's
Right.
just so like lovely. It's just so the whole project has been such a joy to work on. And I mean that even it's just a tiny little piece of it that I had was so refreshing. Refreshing is a good word. Just yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I didn't even say how I was like, as a teacher, using your text as a mentor text to do something similar. We have
Really?
this personal narrative that's required in the state, in almost every state for like a standard writing a narrative. This is another form of narrative that we can show to students as a mentor text and say a family portrait in scars, a family portrait in parties, a family
Yeah.
portrait in land, like a family
Yeah.
portrait in, I don't know, any number of things. Like it's a whatever the,
Clothing. Like a clothing one would be really cool, like a wardrobe one
yeah,
would be
a
so
family
cool.
portrait in clothing, a family portrait in food,
Yep.
a family portrait in sports, like any
Yeah.
family portrait in horses. Like we have like these, a lot of my students have like ranches with horses and
Oh,
cattle.
fun. Yeah.
Um, and when I was in Chicago, there's like a family portrait in neighborhoods. Like when I lived there,
Yeah.
like everyone lives in a different kind of neighborhood. And so it has such potential to inspire students to do the writing as well. So
Oh,
just
that's so cool. Oh, that makes me really excited that it's being used that way. Thank you. That's really cool to know.
we can make an anthology of family portraits. That would be pretty
That would
cool.
be amazing.
That would be
Yo,
really
no, that would be so good. That would be so good. I'm
okay.
just
That's
saying,
burning.
maybe your next project.
Always, yes. Well, so let's hear, like, what are you working on now? What's kind of coming out so we can follow you?
Yeah. So like I said, I'm working on a chapter book series for young readers right now, an early chapter book series. It's actually a spin-off of the original A to Z Mysteries series by Ron Roy. That was from the like 90s and early 2000s. So this is a spin-off called A to Z Animal Mysteries. So each book goes in order of the alphabet and it follows a different animal and a mystery surrounding that animal. So A was the absent alpaca, absent alpacas, I should say. B was back in the castle, etc. Um, the fourth book, Dolphin Detectives, just came out this past summer. And the next book, which is called The Emerald Egg, is out. Wow, I should know the date. I don't know the date off the top of my head. In the spring, I believe. It's out next year. I'm sorry. I'm bad with dates. And I'm currently working on writing the G book, A, B, C, D. Seventh. I can't count. The seventh book in the series. It's just the alphabet, Kayla. Come on.
You're
Um,
going to be
but yeah,
running through that, and like when you get to the 26th letter, you're going to be like, yes.
I'm gonna be a pro, an absolute pro. But yeah, so I'm currently working on writing that book and I'm very excited about it. That's the biggest thing I'm working on. I'm also sort of noodling with some stuff for me that I'm like tinkering with but I have nothing to talk about yet. Like that's still very, very early stages. But like yeah, I'm trying to work on something more novel length, like because these are very short. Chapter books are 5,000-ish words each, which is a full book, obviously. Like they are books, but yeah, I'm also in my spare time working on something longer, so longer form for the first time in a very long time. So that's exciting.
Oh,
But
wonderful.
yeah, so
Well, Kayla, it has been a joy to meet you and talk with you. Is there any
yeah.
final word you want to say as we close?
No, just thank you again for putting this together, for all your hard work. I can't even imagine having to just even send those initial emails. Like that sounds overwhelming to me, let alone actually put this together. So that's incredible. And I just hope that people, yeah, get the book, read the book, share the book. Even if it's just bits and pieces, like just there's so much talent in here, so much variety, and just so much good in this book. And I want people to be able to find it and recognize that. So yeah, that's all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.